There is a moment in the Serengeti just before dawn when the spotted hyena clan begins to move. Not randomly. Not chaotically the way people who have never watched hyenas imagine they move. Deliberately. With a social order so precise, so layered, so ruthlessly enforced that field researchers who have spent years documenting it still find new dimensions in it that they had not anticipated. There is a hierarchy at work in the darkness, a structure of dominance and submission and alliance and betrayal that has been built over years and will shape everything that happens in the next few hours, where the clan goes, who eats first, who gets pushed back, who is protected, who is exposed, who leads, and who follows. And in one particular clan, in the years that researchers had been watching, something was about to change. Something that almost never happens in spotted hyena society was building beneath the surface of every interaction, every feeding, every greeting ceremony, every territorial patrol. A shift in power so profound that when it finally broke open, it would overturn a hierarchy that had been stable for nearly a decade. This is the story of that shift, and if you think it is just a story about animals, you have not been paying attention to how power actually works. Subscribe right now if you want to understand the world beneath the world, the politics that run under everything, the invisible architecture of who decides and who obeys and what happens when that structure cracks. This goes deep. Let us go. To understand what happened in this clan, and to understand why it matters, you have to start with the foundational reality of spotted hyena society, which is that it is built on a principle so different from most of the large social mammals that humans tend to project their assumptions onto, that it requires a genuine recalibration of how you think about dominance and power and gender, and what it means to be in charge of something. Spotted hyenas are matriarchal. Not casually matriarchal, not matriarchal in the sense that females are sometimes influential or occasionally take leading roles. Matriarchal in the sense that the entire social structure is organized from top to bottom around female rank, and that female rank is so comprehensively superior to male rank that even the lowest-ranking adult female in a spotted hyena clan outranks every adult male in that clan, every single one. With very limited exceptions in specific contest situations, the dominance hierarchy in a spotted hyena society is a two-tier system in which all females sit above all males, and within that female tier there is a further hierarchy of its own, with a single female at the top whose position shapes the lives of every member of the clan. That female is the matriarch, and in the clan this story is about. The matriarch's name, as the researchers who studied her designated her, was Fissy. Fissy had held the top rank in her clan for 9 years when this story begins. 9 years is a significant tenure. In the fluid and often violent world of hyena social competition, maintaining alpha status for nearly a decade is not something that happens by accident or by simple physical dominance alone. It requires something more sophisticated. It requires what we might call, without too much anthropomorphizing, political skill. But before we get to Fissy and what happened to her, we need to understand the world she ruled. Because the mechanics of spotted hyena society are the context without which nothing that happened makes sense. The spotted hyena, crocuta, is not what most people think it is. The popular image, the image that has persisted in children's books and wildlife documentaries for generations, is of a scavenger. A skulking, laughing, cowardly animal that picks through the kills of nobler predators and flees at the first sign of confrontation. This image is wrong. It is so thoroughly wrong that wildlife researchers who specialize in large African carnivores frequently describe the scavenger reputation of the spotted hyena as one of the most successful and consequential pieces of ecological misinformation in the popular understanding of African wildlife. Spotted hyenas are apex predators. In most of the ecosystems where they live alongside lions, research has established that hyenas kill a higher percentage of what they eat than lions do. Lions scavenge from hyenas at least as often as hyenas scavenge from lions, and in some study areas significantly more often. The hyenas' laugh, that extraordinary vocalization that gave them their reputation for cowardice and scavenging, is not laughter in any emotional sense. It is a contact call, a communication signal used between clan members to coordinate, to express submission in social interactions, to maintain the bonds of a clan that may be spread across a large territory. It is a form of language, a complex one. Hyenas have a vocal repertoire of over 12 distinct call types, each with specific social meanings, and individuals can recognize the voices of specific clan members the way humans recognize the voices of people they know. The spotted hyena brain is among the most sophisticated of any carnivore, with a prefrontal cortex proportionally as large as many primate species, and this brain capacity is directly connected to the social complexity of their lives. Managing life in a large, competitive, fluid social group with a rigid dominance hierarchy and constant strategic challenges requires cognitive machinery of a high order. Spotted hyenas have it. A clan can number anywhere from a handful of individuals to over 80 members in areas of high prey density. Fissy's clan numbered in the middle of that range, roughly 30 adults and subadults plus several juveniles of varying ages. They held a territory of several dozen square kilometers, which they patrolled and defended with a seriousness and organized aggression that reflected the value of what was inside it: the prey animals, the water sources, the denning sites that had been used by generations of females in this clan. Because here is another thing about spotted hyena social structure that matters enormously for the story we're telling. In spotted hyena society, females are philopatric, which means they stay in their birth clan for their entire lives. Males, when they reach sexual maturity, typically leave and seek to join other clans, where they occupy the bottom of the male hierarchy and slowly work their way up over years of relationship building. The females who were born in a clan, who grew up together, who know each other with the depth that comes from years of shared experience, they are the permanent core of the clan. They are the continuity. And the hierarchy among those females is not simply a matter of who can beat whom in a physical confrontation. It is a matter of inheritance, alliances, politics. Fissy had inherited her rank from her mother, who had been the clan matriarch before her. In spotted hyena society, the cubs of high-ranking females inherit high rank themselves. They are born into a social position the way royal children in human societies are born into theirs, and they are actively supported in defending and maintaining that position by their mothers, and by the other high-ranking females whose interests align with the stability of the existing order. A young female cub born to the alpha female will grow up dominant over females who were born before her and who are physically larger and more experienced than she is. Not because she can defeat them in a fight, but because when she challenges them, her mother, the alpha, intervenes on her behalf. Because the social structure enforces the inheritance. Because rank is not just physical reality, it is political reality. And political reality is maintained by collective agreement, which is another way of saying it is maintained right up until the moment it is not. Fissy's position at the top of the clan hierarchy rested on several interlocking foundations: her own formidable individual presence, because she was a large and aggressive female who did not lose direct confrontations easily; the loyalty of her adult daughters, who occupied ranks 2 and 3 in the female hierarchy, and who had grown up under her dominance, and whose own status depended on the stability of the system that placed them near the top; the relationships she had built and maintained with other high-ranking females in the clan, relationships maintained through the elaborate greeting ceremonies that spotted hyenas use to reinforce social bonds, through shared feeding at kills, through the subtle daily interactions that either strengthen or erode the social fabric of the group. And the general inertia of established hierarchy, which is itself a form of power, because when everyone around you has behaved for years as though you are dominant, that behavior becomes self-reinforcing. The act of submission teaches submission, the habit of deference creates deference. But hierarchies built on multiple interlocking foundations can crack in multiple ways. And in the years before this story reaches its crisis point, several of those foundations were quietly eroding. The first was biological. Fissy was aging. In the wild, spotted hyenas can live to 12 or 14 years, with exceptional individuals reaching older ages. Fissy was approaching 10 years old when the events of this story unfolded. She was not old in the sense of being decrepit. She was still a powerful, experienced animal in her physical prime by most measures. But she had passed the peak of her reproductive capacity, and with it something that researchers have documented but that is easy to underestimate: the social energy and social investment that comes with actively raising cubs. The presence of young cubs changes how a female interacts with her clan. It increases her vigilance, her aggression at kills, her active maintenance of social bonds. It keeps her central, visible, engaged. Fissy had not successfully raised cubs in 2 years. The second crack was relational. Her eldest daughter, the female ranked second in the hierarchy, whom researchers called Biba, had over the course of roughly 18 months done something that is unusual in spotted hyena society and that took researchers a while to fully understand. She had been building alliances, independently, beyond what would be expected from simple parallel inheritance of status from her mother. She had been engaging in greeting ceremonies with females outside the immediate family coalition at rates that were noticeably higher than her historical baseline. She had been present at the den site, the social hub of the clan, more frequently than before. She had been intervening in disputes between other clan members in ways that established her as an independent source of social support, rather than simply as a beneficiary of her mother's power. Biba was not, as far as anyone could directly observe, doing this with a plan. Spotted hyenas do not sit down and strategize the way that framing implies, but what they do is respond to their social environment with remarkable sensitivity, constantly assessing and reassessing relationships, constantly making micro-adjustments in behavior that reflect the current state of the hierarchy and their own position within it. And what Biba's behavior pattern suggested to the researchers who were tracking these interactions was that she was, on some level that operates below the threshold of conscious strategy, positioning herself, accumulating the social capital that would support a challenge. The third crack was ecological, and this is the one that does not get talked about enough when people discuss animal social hierarchies, because it is easy to treat social structure as though it exists in a vacuum, as though dominance hierarchies are purely internal social phenomena with no relationship to the material conditions of the world the animals inhabit. This is a mistake. Social structures in highly intelligent social species are responsive to ecological conditions in ways that are direct and immediate and sometimes dramatic. In the years prior to the overthrow, this particular region of the Serengeti had experienced a shift in prey availability. Not a catastrophic one, not a collapse, but a significant enough reduction in the density of wildebeest in the core of the clan's territory to change the feeding dynamics it kills. When prey is abundant and kills are frequent, even a large clan can feed with relatively low levels of conflict. There is enough to go around or close enough to it that the cost of enforcing feeding hierarchies is not always worth paying. When prey becomes scarcer and kills become more consequential, the competition intensifies. Who eats and who waits, who gets pushed back from a carcass and who stands their ground, these interactions become more frequent and more charged. For Fissy, this change in conditions was a challenge. Her ability to maintain her position depended partly on her continued capacity to demonstrate, repeatedly and consistently, that she could hold her place at the best feeding positions, that other females would defer to her at kills. When prey was plentiful and the cost of deference was low, this was relatively easy to maintain. When prey became scarcer and each kill mattered more, some of the females who had been habitually deferring began to test the boundaries of that deference. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the incremental way that real political change happens through 1,000 small tests, most of which go unnoticed until you look at the pattern they have created. And in this tighter feeding environment, the alliances Biba had been building were becoming relevant in a new way. Because at a contested kill, what determines who eats and who waits is not just the direct physical capacity of the individuals involved. It is the coalition behind each individual. Who will back whom? Who will stay and fight beside which female and who will shrink back? The social capital Biba had been accumulating, the relationships she had been building with females outside the immediate family coalition, began to manifest as a feeding coalition that was, on several observed occasions, larger and more cohesive than what Fissy could mobilize. The first time researchers noticed what they later identified as a critical threshold event, it was not dramatic. These things rarely are right at the beginning. It happened at the carcass of a zebra that the clan had killed cooperatively in the early morning hours. Fissy arrived at the carcass and began feeding. Standard, expected. A few other high-ranking females fed alongside her with the usual jostling for position. Normal. Then Biba arrived. What was not normal was what happened next. Biba moved toward the carcass directly, without the approach pattern that would have been expected from a subordinate female toward the alpha. She did not perform the full submission display that protocol demanded. She came in at an angle that was just slightly more assertive than the researchers had seen her use before with her mother. And Fissy, instead of immediately and aggressively reinforcing her dominance, hesitated. The hesitation lasted perhaps 2 seconds. In the social dynamics of a hyena clan, 2 seconds is an eternity. Other females were watching, they always are. Fissy did eventually assert herself. She snapped at Biba, who moved back. The feeding order was maintained, but the snapshot data the individual interaction coded and entered into a database that was already tracking hundreds of such interactions, recorded something that statistical analysis would later show was part of a pattern. Fissy's response latency and dominance interactions with Biba had been increasing over the preceding 6 months. She was taking longer to assert herself. Not because she could not, but because the calculation she was running, the real-time social calculation that all high-ranking animals in complex social groups are continuously running, was producing a different answer than it had before. That calculation is essentially a cost-benefit analysis of social investment. Asserting dominance has costs, it requires energy, it creates tension, it can provoke counterresponses that escalate unpredictably. The willingness to pay those costs depends on the expected return, which depends on the confidence that the assertion will succeed, which depends on the assessment of the likely backing on both sides. When Fissy looked at Biba and the animals behind Biba and felt the shift in those numbers, however she felt it, through whatever combination of experience and pattern recognition and real-time social assessment, constitutes political judgment in a spotted hyena, she was feeling the erosion of the political foundation that had held her at the top for 9 years. The period between that first recorded threshold event and the actual overthrow lasted approximately 5 months. Those 5 months are, in many ways, the most interesting part of the story, because they are the period in which the change that was coming was already written in the social data if you knew how to read it, but had not yet crossed the threshold of visible, unambiguous expression. During those 5 months, Biba's coalition continued to grow. The mechanisms were the same ones that had been operating for the previous year and a half: the greeting ceremonies, the den presence, the interventions in disputes, but they were intensifying. Researchers documented a particular pattern that was striking once they identified it. Biba was specifically and repeatedly cultivating relationships with two females in the clan who held mid-level rank positions, who were not in Fissy's inner coalition, and who had daughters approaching the age of social independence. These were females who had their own political futures to consider, whose daughters' rank trajectories would be shaped by the next stable hierarchy that emerged after whatever change was coming. In backing Biba now, they were making an investment in a future where their daughters would be positioned well in relation to a new alpha and her coalition. They were not just responding to the present, they were anticipating the future. Or at least they were behaving in ways that had that effect. Fissy, meanwhile, was doing something that researchers found significant. She was increasing her aggression toward the adult male members of the clan. In spotted hyena society, males occupy a permanently subordinate position in relation to females, and the alpha female's relationship with the adult males is in some ways a barometer of her overall social security. When high-ranking females are confident in their female coalition support, they tend toward a more stable and less volatile relationship with the males, who after all do not threaten the female hierarchy directly. When a high-ranking female is feeling the pressure from below within the female hierarchy, the aggression that cannot safely be directed at the source of that pressure, which is another high-ranking female with growing coalition support, sometimes gets displaced onto safer targets. The increased aggression toward males that Fissy displayed in this period could be read as a symptom of social anxiety in the original Greek sense, anxiety meaning a kind of straining uncertainty about what is coming. The overthrow itself, when it happened, was not a single dramatic confrontation. This is one of the ways the reality of animal social change differs most profoundly from the dramatic version that documentary filmmakers often prefer. There was not a moment where Biba charged at Fissy and Fissy fled and the music swelled and a new queen was crowned. What happened was more like the thing that happens in human politics when a leader who has lost the support of their coalition finds themselves going through the motions of authority while everyone around them is already making calculations for the world that comes after. The critical sequence began at a kill. A wildebeest taken by a coalition of 8 clan members including Biba and 3 of her closest allies in the mid-rank female group. Fissy arrived at the kill 20 minutes after it was secured, normal so far, but when she moved to the feeding position that was hers by right of rank, something different happened. Biba did not move back, she held her position. And the 2 females behind her, the mid-rank females whose alliance had been growing for months, held their positions too. Fissy challenged directly and with force. She was still a formidable animal and she was not accepting this quietly. The confrontation that followed was the most intense direct conflict between Biba and Fissy that had been recorded in this clan, lasting several minutes, and involving repeated biting and lunging exchanges, and a level of vocalization that brought other clan members running from across the immediate area, because that kind of sustained conflict between high-ranking females is a social event that the whole clan has an interest in witnessing and positioning themselves in relation to. And this is where the politics that had been building for nearly 2 years became visible in a single moment. As the confrontation escalated and other clan members converged, they made choices. The choices they made reflected the calculations they had been running, the alliances they had been building, the assessments they had been making of where power was shifting. The 2 mid-rank females with whom Biba had been building relationships moved forward, toward Biba's side of the confrontation. Fissy's eldest daughter made a movement toward her mother, and then hesitated and then moved back, and the ambiguity of that movement was itself a kind of statement. Other females held the edge of the confrontation, watching, not committing. One of the lower-ranking females who had historically been in Fissy's coalition made a submission gesture toward Biba that was visible to every animal in the immediate area. Fissy was not beaten in that moment, not physically. She was still standing. She had landed blows and taken blows and she was still in the confrontation with every apparent intention of continuing it. But the social landscape around the confrontation had shifted in a way that she could not have missed. The coalition that should have materialized behind her had not. The deference that should have appeared immediately in the faces of the females around her was not appearing. The numbers did not add up. They had not added up for months, but at this kill, at this confrontation, that arithmetic became impossible to ignore. Fissy withdrew from the carcass. There is something in that withdrawal that repays long attention. It was not flight. She did not run. She moved back from the carcass to a distance of several meters and stood there, facing the group, in a posture that was not submission but was not active challenge either. It was something more ambiguous and more complicated. Researchers who were present at this event and who discussed it extensively in subsequent papers described it as one of the most striking individual behavioral moments they had observed in years of field study. What came after the initial confrontation was a period of roughly 3 weeks during which the new hierarchy was tested and retested in the way that new hierarchies always are, through a constant series of small interactions that collectively established the new social reality as fact. Fissy was present at these interactions. She continued to live in the clan's territory, continued to participate in hunts, continued to interact with clan members. She had not been expelled. Spotted hyena clans do not, in the normal course of dominance shifts, exile the deposed alpha. That is a primate thing, sometimes a human political thing. Hyena social dynamics are different. The former alpha becomes a former alpha, takes up a new position in the hierarchy, continues to live within the group. But she was not the matriarch anymore, and every interaction confirmed it. The submission displays that had been directed at her were now directed at Biba. The greeting ceremonies that flow toward the alpha female, those elaborate and intimate rituals of social acknowledgement that are the constant reaffirmation of the hierarchy in spotted hyena life, those were flowing toward a different animal now. The feeding position at kills, the place that was most visible, most physically central to the social act of the clan's shared existence, that belonged to Biba. What happened to Fissy herself over the following months is a story that is in some ways as interesting as the Overthrow, because it illuminates something about the nature of a life within a hierarchy that goes beyond the simple question of who is on top. Fissy's rank settled into the middle of the female hierarchy, above the younger and lower-ranking females who had always been beneath her, below Biba and the 2 mid-rank females whose alliance with Biba had been decisive. She was, in the language of social hierarchies, somewhere in the middle, not at the bottom, not an outcast, but profoundly reduced from what she had been. The behavioral changes that accompanied this change in rank were documented carefully. Her activity patterns shifted. She spent less time at the central den site, which in a spotted hyena clan is the hub of social life, the place where social bonds are maintained and status is constantly displayed and confirmed. She spent more time at the periphery of the territory. She fed successfully at kills when there was enough for everyone and held back when competition intensified. She had not become passive or broken in any simple sense, but the 9 years of confidence and assertion that had characterized her behavior were replaced by something more cautious, more calculated, more conservative in its risk-taking. She was, in the practical vocabulary of her social world, managing a reduced position with the skill of an experienced animal who understood what she had and what she could no longer claim. Her relationship with her daughters is perhaps the most layered dimension of what followed. Biba remained her daughter. In a spotted hyena clan, the matrilineal connections that define the core social structure do not dissolve when rank shifts, but they are complicated by the new status dynamics in ways that are not entirely comfortable to observe. Biba, now the alpha, maintained a dominant relationship with her mother in formal social interactions. The submission display that protocol required of a subordinate female was required of Fissy when she interacted with Biba in the structured social contexts where rank was being performed. An animal doing something to her mother that no offspring had done in the years of Fissy's dominance. Researchers noted that Biba and Fissy also continued to engage in affiliative interactions, in the grooming and proximity behaviors that signal positive social bonds, outside of the formal dominance-reinforcing contexts. The relationship had not become hostile. It had become complicated in the way that human family relationships become complicated when the power dynamics within them shift. Now this story is one story about one clan, and one of the dangers of telling any particular story well is that it can create the impression of typicality, of universality that may not be warranted. Spotted hyena society is complex and varied, and the specific dynamics of any given clan reflect the specific histories, personalities, demographic compositions, and ecological conditions of that particular group. Matriarchal overthrows of the kind described here are not common events. They require a specific convergence of factors: the aging and social weakening of the incumbent, the emergence of a sufficiently powerful challenger with the coalition-building capacity and motivation to press a challenge, the ecological and social conditions that create the tipping point. Most long-tenured alpha females in spotted hyena clans do not experience overthrow. They age into reduced fertility and slowly cede their position through gradual decline rather than sudden replacement. What makes this particular case so valuable for understanding spotted hyena social dynamics and what made it the subject of extended analysis in the research literature is precisely that it was visible. The researchers were present. The data existed. The full sequence, from the early coalition building to the threshold confrontation to the establishment of the new hierarchy, was documented in enough detail to trace the mechanisms of how power transferred in a way that is rarely possible even in long-term wildlife studies. And what those mechanisms reveal is something that goes beyond the specific case and speaks to something deeper about the nature of social dominance in highly intelligent, socially complex species. Power in spotted hyena society is not simply physical. This point has been made before, and it needs to be made again because the popular understanding of animal hierarchies still tends to default to the image of the biggest, strongest, most aggressive individual at the top, pushing everyone else down through sheer physical force. That image is too simple even for species where physical dominance is the primary mechanism of hierarchy. For spotted hyenas, it is genuinely wrong. Physical capacity matters. Fissy was and remained a formidable animal. But physical capacity is one input into a social calculation that involves at least as much coalition politics as individual fighting ability. The female who can mobilize more support, who has invested more effectively in the relationships that determine who backs whom when a confrontation escalates, who has positioned herself as the node of a network rather than simply the apex of a pyramid, that female is the one who holds power. And that female is the one who takes it when the incumbent's network begins to erode. This is a principle that shows up with startling regularity across the social species that researchers have studied in depth. It shows up in chimpanzee politics, where alpha males often hold power not through individual dominance, but through the management of coalitions among males who are individually more powerful than the alpha, but who support him because the alliance serves their interests. It shows up in wolf packs, though the wolf pack hierarchy is different from what popular culture has imagined it to be, much more a family structure than a dominance tournament. It shows up in elephant matriarchies, where the eldest and most experienced female leads not through force but through the informational and relational capital that she has accumulated over decades. And it shows up, most consequentially for the world we happen to live in human social groups at every scale, from the small informal hierarchies of families and friendship networks to the vast and elaborate political structures of nations. The political scientist would recognize in Biba's coalition-building behavior a textbook case of what some scholars have called soft power accumulation, the investment in relationships and reputation and perceived reliability that creates the conditions for hard power to be exercised effectively. The management consultant would recognize in Fissy's late-stage response pattern the classic signals of a leader who has lost the room, who continues to go through the motions of authority while the coalition that sustains that authority is quietly realigning. The historian would recognize in the 5 months between the first threshold event and the visible overthrow the slow-building pressure of social change that accumulates invisibly until it crosses some tipping point and then appears to happen with sudden and seemingly inexplicable rapidity. None of this means that spotted hyenas are little humans with fur coats. That kind of crude anthropomorphism serves no one and is bad science. What it means is something both more modest and more interesting. It means that the social problems that complex group-living species face are in some ways convergent, that the solutions that evolution has produced in different lineages to the problem of managing life in hierarchical social groups have some deep structural similarities, because the problem itself has deep structural similarities. Managing coalitions, assessing social capital, reading the relationship between individual capacity and collective support, deciding when to challenge and when to defer and when to invest and when to withdraw, these are not uniquely human challenges. They are the challenges of social life at a certain level of complexity, and natural selection has equipped species that face those challenges with the cognitive and behavioral tools to navigate them. The spotted hyena's brain, with its enlarged prefrontal cortex and its remarkable social intelligence, is an evolutionary solution to the specific cognitive demands of life in a clan with a rigid dominance hierarchy and constant strategic challenges. The same way the elephant's memory and the chimpanzee's theory of mind, and the wolf's capacity for cooperative coordination are evolutionary solutions to the specific challenges of those species' social lives. These are not accidental features. They are engineering, the engineering of social life by the patient and pitiless mechanism of natural selection. There is a broader question that this story raises, and it is a question about stability. Why do hierarchies persist? This might seem like an odd question because the obvious answer is force. The dominant individual forces others into submission. But force alone, in a complex social group, is not sufficient to explain the stability of hierarchies that endure for years and sometimes decades, through the tenure of individuals who are aging and thus declining in their raw physical capacity, in groups where challengers exist who could in principle force a change at any time. The answer has to do with something that researchers sometimes call the value of hierarchy itself. A stable dominance hierarchy, whatever its immediate costs to lower-ranking individuals, provides something of genuine value to the group as a whole. It provides predictability. It provides a decision-making structure. In a spotted hyena clan, the alpha female's decisions about where to hunt, when to move, how to respond to a territorial challenge from another clan, these decisions have genuine survival value for every member of the clan. A stable hierarchy means those decisions get made consistently and efficiently. Constant destabilizing challenges to the hierarchy would impose costs on everyone, including the individuals doing the challenging. So there is, from a purely game-theoretic perspective, a kind of collective interest in hierarchy stability that extends even to individuals who do not benefit from the specific hierarchy in place. Change is costly even when it is eventually worth it. This collective interest in stability is part of what makes the moments of change so interesting, because they represent a situation in which the costs of the status quo to enough individuals have exceeded the costs of the disruption that change requires. In Fissy's clan, the shift in ecological conditions that made kills more competitive, combined with Fissy's aging and her failure to maintain the social investment of her peak years, created a situation in which the individuals who had most to gain from a new hierarchy were gaining enough to justify the disruption of creating it. And crucially, Biba's coalition building had reduced the expected cost of that disruption by ensuring that when the challenge came, it would be decisive rather than prolonged. This is what coalition politics does in any social system. It is not just about accumulating power for its own sake. It is about reducing the cost of exercising that power by ensuring that when the moment of challenge comes, the numbers are there, the support is lined up, the calculation has already been done and is already favorable. The confrontation at the kill was not the beginning of Biba's overthrow of Fissy. It was the visible expression of something that had already happened in the social fabric of the clan over the preceding 2 years. By the time the two females faced each other over that wildebeest carcass, the outcome was, in a social sense, already determined. The confrontation was the announcement of a change that the social structure had already made. What happened in the months and years after Biba took the alpha position in the clan tells us something important about the relationship between the individual and the structure that the individual inhabits. Biba was a formidable alpha. She was physically capable, socially intelligent, and had demonstrated in her coalition-building period a quality of social investment that suggested she would be an active and engaged holder of the top rank. Researchers documented in the period following her ascension a stabilization of the coalition dynamics in the clan, a settling of the hierarchy into a new equilibrium that was, in measurable behavioral terms, more stable than the period of the late Fissy years, when the underlying uncertainty had been generating elevated levels of social conflict. Biba's daughters, when they were born, began to inherit the rank position that the matrilineal structure of spotted hyena society dictates they should inherit. The females who had supported Biba's rise saw their own rank positions, and those of their daughters settle into configurations that reflected the alliances they had built. The males of the clan, who had been largely peripheral to the events of the overthrow except as social weather vanes registering the changing pressure around them, resumed their customary position at the bottom of the female hierarchy, with whatever new calibrations the changed female ranks required. And Fissy lived on in the clan, occupying her new mid-rank position, successful enough in feeding and surviving to continue as a functioning member of the group. There is something that resists easy sentimentality in this outcome but also resists easy dismissiveness. She was not expelled, she was not dead. She was, by any objective measure, still living a life that worked on the terms of what a spotted hyena life can be. But she had lost something whose value was total in the only world that mattered to her, the social world of this clan, this territory, these relationships. The loss of alpha status in a spotted hyena clan is not like the loss of a job or a title in a human context, something that removes a label while leaving the underlying person intact. For a spotted hyena, rank is the structure through which every consequential aspect of existence is mediated: food, safety, reproductive opportunity, social recognition. To have been at the center of that structure for 9 years and to find yourself no longer at the center is a displacement whose depth is difficult to overstate in any vocabulary we have available. This is the weight of the story, and it is the weight that makes it more than just a wildlife case study. The mechanisms that produced this outcome, the coalition politics, the social capital investment, the ecological pressure, the gradual erosion of confidence and support, these are not exotic or alien. They are, in the most literal biological sense, our mechanisms too. The spotted hyena and the human being are both highly intelligent, intensely social, coalition-dependent organisms living in structured hierarchies whose stability is always a negotiated outcome rather than a fixed fact. The specific forms that our politics take are radically different. The underlying architecture of why and how power shifts has more in common than most people are comfortable acknowledging. There is a wildlife research station in the Serengeti that has been running continuous observations of spotted hyena clans since the 1980s, one of the longest continuous wildlife studies in Africa, one of the longest of any social carnivore anywhere in the world. The data accumulated in those decades is extraordinary in its depth and granularity. Individual life histories tracked across generations. Dominance interactions coded and analyzed across hundreds of thousands of observations. Reproductive outcomes linked to rank and coalition. Survival rates correlated with social position. Genetic samples that trace the matrilineal lineages of the clans through time. What that data reveals when you sit with it is a portrait of social life at a complexity that most people would not attribute to animals they think of primarily as hyenas, as scavengers, as the laugh in the dark. It reveals animals with individual personalities and individual histories, with relationships that persist across years and that have measurable effects on outcomes that matter, with social strategies that respond to changing conditions with a flexibility that is striking, and with a capacity for the kind of long-game social investment that we see in Biba's coalition building that implies a time horizon far beyond the immediate. The researchers who have spent years with these clans describe a specific effect that long-term field observation produces, a gradual shift in the way you see the animals. Not anthropomorphization in the naive sense of projecting human emotions and motivations onto them without justification. Something more careful and more interesting than that. A growing recognition of the individuality and the social complexity and the genuine strategic intelligence that is operating in every interaction you observe. The hyena you are watching at the kill is not just a hyena. It is Fissy, who has held alpha rank for 9 years and whose position is being quietly undermined by her own daughter. Or it is Biba, who greeted 3 particular females yesterday and 2 others the day before and whose greeting rate with the mid-rank female with yearling daughters has been elevated for 6 weeks. These are not abstractions, they are lives, specific, irreducible political lives. The Serengeti itself, the landscape within which all of this plays out, is a character in the story too. The vast grassland plain, the acacia woodland margins, the kopjes, those dramatic granite outcroppings that break the flatness of the plain and serve as lookout points and resting spots and territorial markers for the lions and leopards and hyenas that live around them. The dry season and the wet season and the great migration of wildebeest that sweeps through the ecosystem, in a pattern that has been running since before any living human was born. Hundreds of thousands of animals moving in a circuit that takes them across the Serengeti and into the Masai Mara in Kenya and back again. A living pulse of prey availability that sets the rhythm of survival for every predator in the system. A spotted hyena clan's territory is not an arbitrary patch of ground. It is a carefully maintained, actively defended social resource whose boundaries have been negotiated and renegotiated over generations. The scent marking and the communal latrines and the territorial calls at the boundary, these are not random. They are a continuous, energetically expensive project of territorial maintenance that requires the coordinated participation of clan members, and that reflects the collective investment of every animal whose survival depends on the resources that territory contains. When Fissy patrolled the boundary of her clan's territory, she was not just exercising dominance for its own sake. She was contributing to the maintenance of a collective resource, participating in the project that kept this particular patch of Serengeti, with its water sources and its kopje resting spots and its particular prey